Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And fair play to Jacob Rees-Mogg for his utterly accurate description of these children of Windrush generation Caribbean Brits who are being treated in an utterly vile fashion at the moment. I would urge him, if he does run his own social media, to look at the replies to his, for example, criticism of Enoch Powell at the weekend, because an awful lot of people who seem to really like Jacob Rees-Mogg, judging by the replies to his own Twitter account this weekend, also really like what Enoch Powell had to say about foreigners. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that Jacob elected to ride that particular tiger during the Brexit debate, but no, I am actually suggesting that Jacob Rees-Mogg elected to ride that tiger of rancid racism during the Brexit debate, and so now has a responsibility to tell the people who think he's on their side, when it comes to Enoch Powell or indeed Caribbean migrants, he categorically isn't on their side. It'd be quite an interesting circle to square, that, should he be minded to try. 4 minutes after 11 is the time, and we turn our attention now to, well, I'm going to say two things. We turn our attention to an appalling abuse of our countrymen and women. But we also, I think it's fair to say, turn our attention to some absolutely first-class journalism, because I'm not sure that this particular story would have achieved the prominence that it has today were it not for the work of Amelia Gentleman at The Guardian. She's been working on this, I think, for about 6 months, and she has, I suspect, been surprised as each month passes by the number of people coming forward to share with her tales of their plight. She joins me on the line now. Amelia, thank you, and well done.
Hi.
If you don't mind me saying that. I wonder if you could take us right back to the beginning and what first sort of caused your journalistic antennae to twitch on this issue.
Yeah, it was last November. I was contacted by a small refugee charity in Wolverhampton who had a client who had been sent to Yarl's Wood, which is a notorious immigration removal centre for women. And this was a woman called Paulette Wilson, who was 60, who'd lived in the UK since she was 9. She'd worked here all of her life. At one point, she was a cook and served food to MPs in the House of Commons. She's somebody who'd paid taxes all her life. But she didn't have correct paperwork to say that she was in the UK legally. She was very surprised that she needed to have that paperwork because she considers herself to be British, because she hadn't been back to Jamaica since she left at the age of 9. Anyway, she had been given a number of quite threatening letters from the Home Office, had been asked to report at the Home Office in Wolverhampton fortnightly for a couple of years, and one day she went in November last year to report, and she was taken to Yarl's Wood. She spent a week in Yarl's Wood, then she was taken to the Heathrow removal centre, about to be taken back to Jamaica, completely distraught because obviously no relatives there, no one alive, hasn't seen that country for over 50 years.
But she's never left the UK because she never had a passport, which was part of her problem.
No. Yeah, exactly. And she had her daughter and granddaughter here. And it was a last-minute intervention by her MP and the work of this refugee charity called the Refugee Migrant Centre in Wolverhampton that got her out. So I went to see her after she'd been removed, because it just seemed really scandalous that she'd been there at all, even though
Yes.
the situation had been resolved. It just seemed really very odd. And we wrote about her case, and the charity, the small refugee charity in Wolverhampton, said that they were dealing with a number of similar cases.
Could you quite believe what you were hearing back then?
Well, it was just very strange that firstly she would have been put in a detention centre, and then when the Home Office understood from the MP that they'd made a mistake, that there wasn't an immediate apology, and she still hasn't had an apology from the Home Office. Anyway, following that, I was contacted by a man who said, my dad's in the same situation, and I met his father, who's called Anthony Bryan, who'd spent 3 weeks in detention centres. He also is somebody who's 60, had lived here all his life, I think, since he was 8 or 9.
Yes.
And he also didn't have a British passport. He'd come from Jamaica with his family. He came here to work. And he wasn't able to prove he was British. And last November, I think, November, yes, the police came and knocked on his door on a Sunday morning and took him to a detention centre. They actually came with Home Office officials and a battering ram. They didn't have to use it because obviously he opened the door. But he spent 3 weeks there. Again, we wrote the story, and the Home Office was in a great hurry to say, oh, this is a mistake,
yes,
let's try and sort it out. But he hasn't had an apology, and he and his family have spent over £3,000 on fees for lawyers and on processing fees for the Home Office.
To be clear, this was when, as Home Secretary, Theresa May started talking about trying to create a hostile environment. New rules were introduced to prevent illegal immigrants from renting a home or working or opening a bank account or holding a driving licence. And these rules are the ones that require documentary evidence of the right to be here. But many Windrush-era children, like I suspect, like you and me, Amelia, have never felt that they would ever have to prove that they had a right to be here. So the idea that you would have documentary evidence covering each of the last 4 decades is what is... that's what's doing for these people. That is what is giving the Home Office the right to, I'm going to say, abuse them in this way, because these men and women are being locked up in grisly circumstances for the crime of not having a paper trail to prove their right to live in the only country they've ever known.
Yeah.
God.
So then the other issues that have been coming up are people who've been made homeless because they haven't been able to prove that they're eligible for state services. So local authorities have said, well, you're not here in this country legally, so you're not eligible for housing benefits, so they've become homeless. Or they've lost their jobs because under these same Home Office requirements, employers have to check that you've got the right to work in the country, and if you don't, employers know that they can be fined. So if you don't have a British passport, a number of people I've spoken to have been told that they have to let them go because they risk being fined.
And similarly, healthcare as well.
I think the most disturbing for me case is the case of a man who we're calling Albert Thompson, who had prostate cancer, and had an operation on the NHS a year ago and was due to have a 12-week series of radiotherapy. And when he went for his first session, again at the end of last year, he was asked to fill in a form that gave his passport number, and he said, I don't have a passport. He has lived in the UK for 44 years, arrived as a teenager from Jamaica, has worked, paid taxes all his life until he got ill. What was his?
Just tell my listeners what his mum was doing for a living when Albert arrived here in 1973.
He came over because his mum was working as a nurse. So he himself sees a certain irony in the fact that his mum came and gave her life to working in healthcare, and he's been told that he's not entitled to NHS treatment. He was told that without the passport he'd have to pay £54,000, and because he was in the same situation, not eligible for benefits, made homeless by the fact that he didn't have a passport, unable to work because he was ill, but he actually also wouldn't be allowed to work. So there's no way that he could pay that £54,000. This case, most of the other cases the Home Office has said will act fast to try and help these people. This case has been raised by Jeremy Corbyn in the House of Commons. Theresa May said she'd look into it. But even though it's a month, I think, since we raised it in The Guardian, he's still not getting his treatment.
And how significant against that backdrop is this decision by Downing Street today to reject a formal diplomatic request to discuss the issues at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting this week?
It's just a really odd decision.
Do you think it's because the knot is Gordian? Do you think it's because they look at this and think there's no earthly way we can fix this? So let's just hope it goes away? I don't want to speculate.
No, they would be wrong to think there's no earthly way to fix it, because there are a number of reasonably logical, simple things that they could do to fix the anomaly. The first of them is to reduce the very, very high burden of proof that's put on these people who, as you say, often have to document their applications for leave to remain with several bits of evidence for every year that they've been in the country. And they need to have documents from their primary schools, from their secondary schools, from GPs. And often, a lot of the people I've spoken to say, well, we go back to the primary school. The primary school's become an academy.
Anymore,
They don't have records.
No, of course.
The GP is dead.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the thing for me that is still a big unknown in all of this is how many people are affected.
Would you take a punt at that or not?
Well, I just don't know. I mean, the charity that's been amazingly helpful to a number of these people in East London say that they've dealt with 120 cases in the past 3 years, and that the numbers are going up every year. That's a small charity in East London. In the past 4 or 5 months, I've spoken to in detail about 15 people who've had very, very difficult issues. The High Commissioners, the Jamaican Caribbean High Commissioners, think it could be thousands of people, but it should be clear that it's not that thousands of people are going to be deported. It's just that a large number of people could find that they've got difficulties in terms of not being able to travel, to see dying relatives in Jamaica, or difficulties.
So they won't know that they're in this trap until they try to do something.
People won't know yet. And one lawyer said to me the problem often only arises when you apply for your pension. But we don't know. I mean, there's a kind of an upper limit of
course,
50,000 people who could potentially be in this situation. But I think it's important not to panic people. I mean, I've had emails from people who are saying they're very worried they're going to be deported. People are very unlikely to be deported. I think the government...
It's not the most reassuring sentence in the English language, Amelia. Very unlikely to be deported, is it?
No, well, that's true. I mean, it's just... Anyway, a large number of people are certainly having really catastrophic consequences.
To whom do I refer people listening now? And we'll open up our phone lines after I've spoken to you. If they've found themselves in this situation, where do they find reassurance or actual assistance if they've already sort of felt that?
Well, interestingly, today the International Development Secretary, Penny Mordaunt, said that people should go and see their MPs. And she tried to be quite reassuring, but it's kind of interesting that instead of saying, you know, the Home Office will sort it out for you, would be the correct...
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Logical direction. She says, go to see your MP. And I think probably that is the best thing to do. The Home Office has consistently been saying, get legal advice, but they don't realise that for most people that this is not covered by legal aid anymore. And the legal advice is extremely expensive.
The removal of legal aid, presumably, leads back to the same government that introduced these new rules 4 years ago.
That's right, yeah.
Amelia Gentleman, many thanks indeed. And I'll say it again, because our profession rightly comes in for an awful lot of criticism. This is absolutely first-class journalism, and it will hopefully save some of these people from the most appalling experiences. So buy The Guardian and read this article, read all of Amelia Gentleman's work in this field. And it is, I mean, it's got to be added as well. The Daily Mail is now campaigning to help these people, and Jacob Rees-Mogg speaking very powerfully in their support just a couple of hours ago on this radio station. So it speaks to a sense of injustice that I think is shared by all but the most toxic racists. Unfortunately, in Mr. Rees-Mogg's case, of course, an awful lot of those toxic racists think he's the Messiah. Don't know quite how they're going to process this information, but I want to hear from you if this has touched your life. We'll start with, I don't know, I'm kind of hoping, just looking at my switchboard, I hope they're all still waiting to talk about Syria, because I'm kind of hoping that you're not going to ring me and that Amelia's found a significant majority of the people that have been affected, or that this discovery has already been made. I'm going to tell you something very briefly, and it's from fiction, it's from art, it's not from real life, but like the best art, it will reflect real life in a way that sometimes first-person accounts just can't. I think it's from Small Island, Notes on a Small Island, I think it is, which is, it's called Small Island by Andrea Levy. And it follows 4 members of the Windrush. Actually, it's 18 after 11. I'll tell you about this after the break. But if you are already in this category, or you have something that you think the rest of us would be interested to hear about this story, the number you need is 03456060973. Coming over here to join your mother, who's a nurse, working, paying taxes, feeling British all your life, seeking cancer treatment, and being told you've got to find 54 grand to pay for it, and you could possibly face deportation anyway. Arguably, the only really strong policy change that Theresa May introduced as Home Secretary. Famous for her dithering. Of course, we had the vans. We had talk of creating a hostile environment. This is on you. This is on you, Prime Minister. This is on you. You were Home Secretary when this happened. You were Home Secretary when these rules were introduced. You read the documents that have consigned these men and women to, at best, profound confusion, at worst, incarceration in an immigration centre, awaiting deportation. You wrote these laws. Where are you? The acres of newsprint and broadcast time, I mean, we did it here as well, of course. No, I'm letting myself off this particular hook, dedicated to the question of Jeremy Corbyn's anti-Semitism, seems to me to be rather disproportionate when you look at Theresa May's base racism, potentially. I can't think why else she could have enacted laws that would render people who've been here for 40 years facing incarceration and deportation for the crime of not having a passport and not being able to prove that they've been here for 40 years. It's supposed to be a hostile environment for illegal immigrants. I hate to say this, I hesitate to say this, but she seems to think that black people deserve less protection under the law than white people, or at least British West Indian people deserve less protection under the law than vicars' daughters from the home counties. That's how it looks. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And you know me, I'll admit it. 23 after 11 is the time. Vincent is in Hounslow. Vincent, what can you tell us?
I know I've tried to be brief, but I'm so angry because this happens to me.
Come on.
Right? I went to Jamaica for a holiday. Right? Coming back, I had all of my Jamaican passport from 1965. That's the first one I got. By this time, I'm here for about 40 years. I've got 4 passports. I traveled to America on it, and I traveled, back and forward to Jamaica with this 4 passports. Those, I thought, were my papers.
Yes.
Right. I went, and I'm milking Jamaica, so I'm going to board the plane very late. Right. I went into that lady who's doing my papers. She says, she rolled her eyes, and she said, I'm sorry, but you can't. Your papers are not correct, and you can't board the plane. I got, well, not outrageously mad, but, but I really start ripping into the system.
Right.
I said, you're crazy. Now, she said, you can't. Anyway, I was looking for the big security guys to just come and lift me up. But they were everybody was just standing there looking.
But this was before, Vincent, the new Home Office laws were brought in. This is because it's only 4 years ago, as I understand it, that you'd have to prove that you'd been here for 40 years. You'd have to provide evidence from every decade going back to the early 70s. So this was a different wrinkle in the system.
James, I'm telling you, this is 12 years ago.
Yeah.
My British passport is only 12 years old, right? Yeah. My European passport,
of course,
is only 12 years old, right?
So what happened then? What reason were you being given for not being allowed to come home?
I'm not. She said I'm not a citizen of the United Kingdom, therefore I've got no papers to show that I'm a citizen or resident of the United Kingdom, so I cannot board the plane.
Because you never thought you'd need any, because you've lived here pretty much all your life?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you came over as a child?
No. I came over when I was 22.
Oh, okay.
Like I told your researcher.
I'm just checking.
I'm Audley's father.
Audley Harrison?
Yeah.
Right.
So there I was.
Didn't he win a gold medal in the Olympics? For what country was he fighting for, Vincent?
Right. And I went to Buckingham Palace with Audley when he's collecting his OBE and all the rest. And here I am, right? And all the newspaper here is flooded with Audley Harrison, and all the rest of it, gold medalist for England.
Yeah.
And here I am, right, with all my papers in front of me. At that time, I lived in England for 40 years.
But you can't prove that you're British.
No.
Wow.
I was so angry. But I think everybody was enjoying it.
What do you mean? Enjoying your performance at the airport?
Yeah.
Vincent?
Yeah. So they said they sent for the manager.
Right.
And here comes the lady, the manager. And she going through my passport again. I think we got to board the plane. They're calling, last call. So I said to her, no, don't go through it. Your colleagues have already gone through it, so just let me go. Anyway, she said, you can't go on the plane. I said, what? She said, all right, let it go on. When he reached London, Heathrow, right, they will send him back.
Good grief.
So I came, I got on the plane, and when I reached Heathrow, this British passport, this line, others, the other queue, right? So I went there, and I owed that guy a drink. The guy looked through my papers, and he said, Mr. Harrison, he was about 22.
Yeah.
Right? Right. He looked through my papers, and he said, Mr. Harrison, I feel embarrassed to be talking to you like this.
Gosh.
Right? But please, as soon as I let you through, because he could have sent me back. He said, as soon as I let you through, go and get yourself a British passport.
So that was all you had to do, was just apply for a British passport rather than a Caribbean one, the Jamaican one?
Yeah. He said, go and get yourself a British passport.
And you could do that. You had the paperwork in place.
All the paperwork.
So you're all right now. But if you hadn't done that, if you'd never left the country, and you still had your Jamaican passport, you would now, under the rules that came in 4 years ago, unless you took Audley with you to the Home Office, in which case they might find a fast track to push you through ever so slightly more quickly than everybody else. But you would now. Do you think you could prove? You got here in '65, did you?
Yeah.
Do you think you could prove that you were living here for each one of those decades, for the 60s, well, let's leave the 60s out of it, for the 70s, 80s, 90s and noughties? Could you prove that you were living in this country? Because I couldn't. I was born in 1972. I don't know when I could prove.
Audley. Right?
Oh, really? Yes. We've got a lot in common, me and your son, Vincent, actually.
I would have to bring my children to the Home Office.
Yeah?
But I tell you something, I was ready, at that 12 years ago, I was ready to sue the Jamaican government for being so stupid and lapsed and don't have no teeth.
Well, that might be part of it.
The British government as
yes, well, in their defence, they probably didn't know that this was ever going to happen. But you've reminded us that it was. I mean, the bureaucracy was. You could fall foul of the bureaucracy 12 years ago, and then they weaponised it 4 years ago to create a situation that many people are waiting to describe to me now. Vincent, thank you so much. I can tell that you're in Hounslow because I can hear the aeroplanes in the background.
I know.
Give our best to Audley as well, won't you?
Yeah, right, cheers.
Thank you very much. We'll talk again. Sad that it's 2018 and we're still having these kinds of conversations. Right, Gary, in a tweet to @Mr. James O.B. We're having more of them than we have at any other point in my life, or certainly my adult life. More conversations about really institutionalised racism at the very highest levels of government. And you could tell, do you remember that conference speech when all the UKIP clowns were lining up to say Theresa May had really played a blinder? I mean, how could people not have seen the direction in which the traffic was going? When Amber Rudd announced plans to make companies publish lists of foreign workers, something that it took this little fella to point out could have been lifted straight from the pages of Mein Kampf. What do you think was going to happen? What did Jacob Rees-Mogg think was going to happen when he started showing a little bit of ankle to some of the vilest people on the planet, hanging out with some of the most grim demagogues? And then when he tweets, I agree with my father about Enoch Powell, the state of his Twitter feed at the weekend. Honestly, what did you think was going to happen when you threw red meat to these racists? And now where do we find ourselves? We find ourselves with the Prime Minister presiding over the incarceration of innocent British people for the, quotes, crime, end quotes, of not being able to prove where they were for the last 40 years. People who, and that case of the man who's asked to be known as Albert Thompson is the most poignant, perhaps. Turned up for cancer. He came here at 9 to join his mother, who was a nurse. I'll say that again, who was a nurse. He's now been told, after 40 years of paying tax, they need 54 grand off him if he wants to carry on his treatment for prostate cancer. Paulette Wilson, the first woman, the first person to come to the attention of the Guardian journalist Amelia Gentleman, who has led the line on this, ended up in Yarl's Wood Immigration Removal Centre, ended up at Heathrow. That's how far down the road towards deportation to a country that she hadn't been to since 1968. That's how far down the road she got before the intervention of her MP and a refugee charity in Wolverhampton helped. You couldn't make this up, you know. Joseph Heller, Catch-22, probably the best post-Kafka satirist of bureaucracy. She served food in the House of Commons. She worked there as a cook. 34 years of national insurance records. I think we'll stay with this till 1 today, because my phone's breaking my heart to tell you. Phones are ringing off the hook. 03456060973 is the number to call if you want to join in. And I very, very briefly, Ernie and Shirley, I'll be with you imminently. I just want to tell you something from that book by, I'm pretty sure it's from Small Island. You know what it's like. You get all your things that you've seen at the movies or you've read in books, or well, they all get a bit jumbled up sometimes. And when you've got a beautiful little vignette in your memory, you can't be 100% sure where it came from. But I'm pretty sure this is from Small Island by Andrea Levy, which follows 4 Windrush Caribbean people coming here. And I always remember one of them being convinced that he'd be treated like royalty when he got here because his brother had died flying Spitfires in the Second World War. So, in his mind, that would render him really valuable when he got to Britain, at the invitation of the British government to come here and work. And because he'd lost his brother had flown Spitfires, I think, in the Second World War. He just presumed that that would be like a, you know, a badge of honour. And then he got here and found the no dogs, no blacks, no Irish signs. And the kind of people who put those signs up, some of us have to work with them. Ernie's in Isleworth. Ernie, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Yes, I've been in the same situation. I still am in the same situation. I came over here in 1960 to join my parents with a British passport from Grenada.
Right.
And, you know, just started work in 1966 in Shepherd's Bush as a sign writer. And, you know, carried on working. And it was only about, if ever I needed to travel, which was very rare, I'd get a 1-year British visitor's passport.
That's going back a bit, Ernie. I used to get them from the post office in Kidderminster, the little cardboard ones.
That's right.
Yeah, I loved those.
You know, that was it. And it was only eventually, about 20 years ago, when a girlfriend of mine, you know, booked a little trip for us. I had to try and... I tried getting one of those passports. They did away with them. So I tried to get a proper passport. And then it was only then I found out about naturalisation. Have I ever been naturalised? Well, anyway, we had to forget about that.
Yeah.
Only because, you know, with working and everything, I just didn't have time for things like that, you know. But in the meantime, you know, all I've done is just carried on working and never really thought any more about it. But over the years, they keep in the goalpost all the time. So when I applied again for a passport, they threatened to kick me out of the country.
Good grief.
I had papers, you know, stating, you know, what time I'm going to leave and all the rest of it. And I just obviously freaked out. I went, you know, to see the solicitor and, you know, they had to write letters and everything. I had to write to HMRC, pay them £100 for a bit of paper stating, you know, when I started work and all the rest.
So, yeah, go on. So when was this? How recently was this?
Oh, this is just over the last couple of years.
So you're in the heart of this story?
Yes.
Right in the heart of it.
Yes.
So what did you... Forgive me, because I'm not going to lie to you, Annie. I'm a little bit shell-shocked. by the extent of this. And
no, this country is racist. It's racist.
Yes, but there are lots of people in it who aren't, and you're talking to one of them. So let's focus on what precisely you were told you had to provide, because this idea of having to prove evidence of being here for every decade since 1971.
I had to prove all sorts of things, like, schools and everything like that.
Really?
And the thing is, you phone these people. I phoned up the first place that I worked for, and they said, well, our records don't go back that far. They go back about 10 years.
Of course they do. Of course they do.
And I'm saying, well, look, you're saying that, prove you've been in the country that long. Well, prove I haven't. Haven't you got any sort of documentation or anything, that when I've landed in the country? And I'd just like to say this, that I look at the situation and rapists, murderers, and all these people, they come in the country, it's their human right. You can't kick them out because they'll be executed if they go back to where they want, to their place for murder and all sorts of things like that.
I understand, and for once I'm going to allow that to pass, but it's pure Daily Mail exaggeration. I can assure you that the number or the incidence of the things that you describe are about as close to negligible as it's possible to be. But your plight shouldn't be seen in the relief to them, because I wouldn't even put you on the same page. And this use of the word amnesty as well. They're going to offer an amnesty to people like you. You get an amnesty if you've done something wrong. I mean, it's astonishing that this situation has been allowed to come about, and you managed to do it. You managed to do all the paperwork. You managed to prove that you...
Sorry, I've got my biometric card.
Yes, right, you're all right then.
But that runs out at some stage. And
I think you'd have to reapply for that in 2024, won't you?
Oh, something like that, James.
How does it make you feel, Ernie?
It makes me feel very bitter. Because, to be treated like this, I
do. I can imagine.
All the things that I've been through in this country, being beaten up by racist thugs, being handcuffed by the police, being, given a very, very hard time.
Yes.
But at the same time, I just try and get on with things, because we West Indians, we're quite docile, really. I
don't know if I'd say that to Vincent up the road from you in Hounslow, to Audley Harrison's dad. I don't know that necessarily. I don't think he was very docile at Jamaica Airport that day when they were telling him he wasn't allowed to come home. But I understand what you mean. You don't go out looking for trouble, is what you're describing.
Right, that's right.
Yes.
We're not clued up. We're not well clued up on everything. We've come here, we've integrated.
Well, you were told, come here, work, make it your home, be one of us.
That's it. Obviously my parents, we came to this country to better ourselves, for a better life, and it was Enoch Powell that came to the West Indies and said, look, there's work for you people if you want it, right? And that's what happened. My uncle came over here, he worked, he saved some money, he sent for my mother and father, they came up, they worked, they saved some money, they sent for me and my brother, and, there were times 4 of us were living in one room. Really?
And you've played by the rules. You've been on the ladder of life. You've paid your taxes. You've done your duty, and at the end of that process, towards the, what are you, in your 60s now, Ernie?
Yes.
So you're in your 60s, and you've essentially been told by the government, which you look to for protection and to which you pay your taxes. You've essentially been told that you're a second-class citizen, and you're going to have to prove that, by the way.
So at the moment, right now, the way things are going, it's in the hands of the solicitor. I've got to get two referees, and they've got to give their own passport numbers
to say that they know you and that you're kosher.
Well, yes, and also...
This is Theresa May. She did it. She wrote this. This is her idea. It's not something that's happened by accident or something that has sort of shaken down. She did this to you deliberately.
Oh yes, and I voted for Thatcher, and she brought that thing in from the start. She started the ball rolling on that, and I'll tell you, I'm off a bit because there's so much I want to say about this.
Well, we've started. We're scratching the surface, and you know me. I'll stay with this for as long as we have to. What, if we had to, just leaving aside, if you don't mind, the time and the stress that you've expended, the fear and the finance. I mean, how much do you think you've spent?
Oh gosh, I dread to think.
Well, don't then.
It's going to cost more. I'm up for now, probably with solicitor's fee and what I've got to pay the Home Office. It's going to be a couple of grand.
Well, it's water off a duck's back, isn't it, for Theresa May and her cabinet? But for most people listening to this programme, that is what I usually describe as a significant chunk of change. Only thank you, and I'm sorry. That Wetherspoons story is interesting, isn't it? Chairman of Wetherspoons, of course, Tim Martin, very significant donor to Vote Leave. Vote Leave currently under investigation for possible overspending and data sharing via Facebook. And as you've just heard, Wetherspoons have elected to delete all their Facebook and Twitter accounts because people are on them too much and they've been trolling MPs. David Lammy is an MP who I presume gets trolled rather more than most for reasons that don't need me to explain. He is also at the front of the campaign to address the plight of the so-called Windrush generation. David, I'll begin by asking you, well, how has this happened? Forgive the simplistic question, but I'm in a state of spluttering disbelief this morning. What's your analysis of whether it's a question of competence or something rather uglier?
Well, Theresa May made a decision to create a hostile environment for immigrants in this country.
Specifically for illegal immigrants, to be fair to the then Home Secretary.
To be fair, yes, you're right, quite right, for illegal immigrants in this country. And now we're in a situation where people who have lived here for the vast majority of their life, many 50, 60 years, are caught up in a situation where they're losing their jobs, they are struggling to get access to health care, losing their pensions. This hostile environment is basically driving them out of their own home when they have served this country, paid their taxes, are fully British, and quite frankly, in 2018, that black men and women from the West Indies and other places should have to explain that they are British. Breaks my heart. It reduces me to tears. I think of my own elder brothers my eldest brother is 59. It just happened that he was born in Britain, but he could have been born in Guyana. He would be caught up in this. But I've got constituents who are in tears, who have threatened with deportation. This is grim. This is ugly. This is not something that we have come to understand as British, the way we behave to fellow Commonwealth citizens. And frankly, for Theresa May to refuse to meet heads of government from the Caribbean is a serious slap in the face to countries who we say we want to strike a trade deal with in the coming months. It's outrageous. I frankly cannot believe that I am on your show defending the rights of British citizens to remain in this country.
I know, and I've been on a bit of a crash course in it over the weekend. There is a fairly reliable paper trail suggesting that, as Home Secretary, she was warned that the so-called hostile environment for illegal immigrants would create this kind of crisis for people here legally. I guess there's no way for you to be sure that she elected to ignore that it ever reached her desk, that she perhaps saw the plight of men like Albert Thompson and Renford McIntyre, or women like Paulette Wilson. She saw it as a price worth paying for the rhetoric, because it was in that conference speech that all the UKIP people were queuing up to applaud that she gave the first indication of where her personal prejudices or positions may lie on this. There's no way you can know for sure that she was comfortable with this, is there?
Well, the phrase is, if you lie down with dogs, you get fleas. And this desire to chase hard right-wing votes with an anti-immigrant rhetoric is now leading us to a place that is so extremely divisive. Many of us cannot believe that this is the Britain that we've come to understand. I, this morning, am now in step with Jacob Rees-Mogg and with Tom Tugendhat, two Conservatives, on the position that we find ourselves with. And frankly, the Prime Minister is running scared. Why won't she meet those Caribbean heads of government? Why didn't she? Look,
you've put me in an impossible situation. I'm now. It doesn't happen very often, as you know, David. But I'm now going to try and defend Theresa May's position from your assaults. It could have just been bad decision making. She could want to talk about it. She could want to fix it. But the way that the request reached her to talk to the Commonwealth, she thought, well, we're not going to get much done now. It doesn't necessarily speak of callousness or indeed complicity, does it? Necessarily.
I think when you've got 12 countries, I think it was, grouping together to request a brief meeting, to say that it didn't quite reach her in the right way, I can't reconcile that. These are serious people who are coming to our country. The Queen is hosting them.
Yes.
And we now have a diplomatic I think, crisis, frankly, in the Caribbean region. It is seen as a slap in the face, and story after story is heartbreaking. I've led many campaigns over the years. This, frankly, is uniting every sane person in the country. There isn't a lot of trolling on this, because everyone recognises in those faces giants who've wrap the British flag around their shoulders. We think of people like Jessica Ennis. We think of people like Daley Thompson, Colin Jackson. These are the kinds of people that we are. Kelly Holmes, we're hugely proud of. Lenny Henry. These are the people who we are now saying we're turfing out of our country and treating in this way. It's a scandal. It's outrageous. It's because of this horrible rhetoric that people have pandered to over the last few months, and it would be, you could solve this now very quickly. It's not an amnesty, because an amnesty suggests wrongdoing, and there's no wrongdoing on their part. But absolutely, very quickly, the Home Office could say, for these people, of course they have a right to stay, simplify the system greatly, so there's not this bureaucratic nightmare that these people are caught up in. And let me just say also, knowing the West Indian community as I do, many of these folk did not have a passport. They've never left Britain. They are working people, but they have not got a lot of money. Think of the sorts of people that have never got a passport to leave the country, and you're beginning to imagine these sorts of families. So then to shove a huge bureaucracy down their throat to demonstrate the fact that they've been dinner ladies, hospital porters, that they
House
have
of Commons
London
cooks,
Underground, to find paychecks back into the 1960s and 70s, to find teachers who can vouch that you were at a particular school when many of them now will no longer be with us. This is a scandal. It's a scandal. It's embarrassing. I don't know what Theresa May and the Home Secretary have been doing. And that's why so many MPs have signed this letter, and the story continues.
Do you think, I mean, you don't have to answer this, do you think Theresa May currently looks like a woman who holds people of colour in lower regard than white men and women?
You know, I can't get into Theresa May's mind. But today we have a Prime Minister that looks callous and cold, and unable to demonstrate empathy, and seems content to have a tier of people who are second class.
David Lammy, the MP, of course, for Tottenham, and his parents, as you heard, his parents came from Guyana as members of the Windrush generation. 11:57 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and it seems to be a bit of a recurring theme at the moment, that I can't quite believe what's happening to my country, to your country, to our country. Who wanted this then, eh? You let that genie out of the bottle, you can't get it back in again. And you're not allowed to say that you weren't warned. I'm going to continue with this conversation after 12 o'clock, because people are ringing me to tell me their stories, including, I think, Shirley will be up first, listening to LBC since the 70s. First time she's ever felt compelled to call in to tell her story. We will listen to it, Shirley, and we will share it, I promise you. The other stories that we may find some time to include, although, frankly, the way things stand and looking at my switchboard now, I doubt it, include the calls for us to have more say over how NHS money is spent specifically on us, hundreds of thousands of people receiving personal allowances of NHS cash to organise their own care, as ministers claim that they are seeking to, quote, put power back into the hands of patients. A very, very odd suggestion, and possibly a troubling one, although I'm sure that there will be conflicting analyses that can portray it as something altogether more positive. We continue, though, for the time being, to talk about the potentially thousands, and the point is, at the moment, nobody knows how many there are. We've spoken to the journalist who broke and developed the story, and we've spoken to the politician, or one of the politicians at the front of the campaign, to change things. We talk about the potentially thousands of British people who have lived here for almost all of their lives, arriving at the age of 3 or 7 or 9 to join or come with parents who came at the British government's invitation to provide infrastructure support to our post-war society, to, in the first instance, to the first generation, to drive the buses and the tube trains and do the jobs that we couldn't do ourselves for reasons of numbers, and now their children are being told that they don't really belong here. Robbed of... I mean, just imagine what it would be like. That's all you have to do. I appreciate that empathy is an increasingly scarce commodity in this country at the moment, or at least it would be if you allowed yourself to believe the portrayal of this country perpetrated by people like Tony Gallagher, the editor of The Sun, and his mates over at the Daily Mail. This is not a country that's full of hate and bile. It's just that hate and bile are a lot easier to sell than compassion and complicated calmness. But imagine if it happened to you, OK? Boris Johnson was born in America, wasn't he? A lot of the prominent Brexit campaigners, I think Daniel Hannan and Douglas Carswell, were both born in former colonies. I think they were. I'll double check, but it's not an insult to say that. Imagine if it happened to them. You've got to prove that you've lived here for the last 40 years. Otherwise, we're going to deport you. It's quite incredible, isn't it? I'm just getting some breaking news now that Theresa May has undertaken precisely the U-turn that we've been advising her to undertake for the last hour. She will hold a meeting. This is just unbelievable now. What does government actually mean? What is leadership? Theresa May will hold a meeting with counterparts from Caribbean states this week to discuss concerns over the status of Windrush generation immigrants. We've just had that in from Downing Street now. I told you they were listening. And the idea that somebody in Downing... There's two problems here. The main problem, of course, is that the people she surrounds herself with are spectacularly incompetent. This character, Nick Timothy, who's ended up with a column on the Daily Telegraph, appears to me to be the very embodiment of what you describe as political incompetence. So she's clearly surrounded. Who's the head spokesperson now? Former political editor of the Daily Mail. You think I exaggerate this stuff? Name is Slack. James Slack, his name is. He'll be sitting there now trying to... How are we going to deal with this? I'll tell you how you deal with this. When people, based upon their origins, are being treated like scum, when people are being locked up for the crime of not being able to prove where they were for every single one of the last 40 years, and when they all hail from the Caribbean, and Caribbean leaders say to you, could we have a chat about this, Prime Minister Singh, we're all here for a Commonwealth summit. Could we talk about people like Hubert Howard, who arrived here at the age of 3 and has never lived anywhere else? Can we talk about people like Paulette Wilson, who ended up at Heathrow? She was so close to being deported. And I have to tell you, I've just received a quote. I've just seen Kathy Newman of Channel 4 News has received confirmation from the Home Office that people have already been deported. And I quote now, in Britain in 2018, I quote, they have been deported in error. Mothers, daughters, fathers, sons, brothers, sisters, cousins, friends, neighbours, teachers, nurses, deported in error from the only home they've ever known. And if it wasn't for the journalists on newspapers that still have some sort of claim to integrity and honesty, if it wasn't for them, Theresa May wouldn't have even rolled over. So somewhere in Downing Street, they had a conversation about this. Former political editor of the Daily Mail, former editor of the Andrew Marr programme. They're all sitting around having a chat how they're going to cope with it. Why don't you just meet them, Prime Minister? Why couldn't anybody just say that to her? Why didn't you? We've deported people in error as a result of laws that you brought in as Home Secretary. Maybe you should just meet them. No, I don't think so. I might get a phone call off Donald later. What if I'm busy? We are deporting people in error because of laws that you brought in. The countries to which they are being deported have asked if they could talk to you about this situation. You said no, and only when the optics, as I believe they refer to these matters now, only when the optics got so toxic that even a man like Jacob Rees-Mogg, whose core support is about as racist as it's possible to be, even when a man like Jacob Rees-Mogg recognises the fundamental injustice of the laws that you brought in as Home Secretary, do you do the bare minimum? And man alive, I get cross sometimes. I really do. 12:08 is the time. Shirley is in Sutton. Sorry, Shirley, I went off on a bit of a mad one then. I should have spoken to you first and then gone off on my tirade. What would you like to tell us?
Well, I've been listening to LBC since 1975, and I've never been so impelled to call the station before. My parents came here back in the 1950s. Very proud, decent West Indians, Jamaicans.
Yes.
And they were asked to come here to the mother country to help rebuild the country after the war.
Yes.
Help rebuild the infrastructure, help out on London transport, and transports all over the country, help with the NHS, and for them and their children to be treated like this is despicable.
I'm going to ask what's happened to you. I mean, can you take me off speakerphone first? Is that possible, do you think?
You're not on.
Am I not? It's just an echoey line. I apologise. You know I've got to keep an eye on the housework.
Okay.
So
I'm at work, actually. I've just found a quiet room.
There we go. It must be. It's because it's empty. It's a bit echoey. But anyway, these things don't matter. So are you worried that you might be caught up in this yourself?
Well, no, not personally.
Good.
But I do have a cousin who had the opportunity to visit Jamaica for the first time since he left back in the early 70s, and he was frightened to leave, and we didn't understand why. Now I understand why. Because he was worried that if he left, he wouldn't be able to come back.
Right.
Now, he's since been forced to take a citizenship course, and has been told he now needs to find £2,000 to pay for his papers.
Good grief.
So it's absolutely disgusting.
How do you process what's happening? Because you heard me talking to David Lammy, and I am, because I'm not. I don't have a dog in the race. I'm using empathy to imagine what it's like for you, and I worry that possibly leads me into quite insensitive territory. But I would like to believe that this has happened by accident and that it is going to be weighing very heavily on Theresa May's mind. Obviously, the original decision not to meet the Commonwealth leaders suggests it wasn't weighing that heavily on their mind, but it could be the unintended consequence of then we're back to the hostile environment, aren't we? And the desperation to look like a Home Secretary that was anti-immigration.
Well, to be honest, James, right now, I don't want to get too involved with the political side.
No, of course.
But the important thing for me is to let everybody out there be aware that there is a petition going around. It's been shared on social media for us to all sign a petition to get the MPs to actually take some action. So I was really pleased to hear this morning that there was 140 MPs.
Yeah, out of about 650, though.
Yes, but it's a start.
It is, of course.
It's a start. And the fact that I'm even speaking on the radio just shows you how incensed I am after all these years.
Yes, that's what I just want to tap into that, if I may, because I want you to tell me what it speaks to inside you, this story.
Do you know, I know my parents,
yes,
and I know people of that generation. They're very proud, decent people, and they're insulted. I feel, I was born here, and as a first-generation black Jamaican, I feel insulted.
Yes.
I feel as though my people have been used and they're now being abused and just being cast aside. And it's disgusting. It's disgusting. It really hurts. You know, we've all been brought up understanding where we've come from, but we've also been extremely proud to be British. And it's a real slap in the face for all of us. But we're here. And the important thing for me is that I don't want this to be a story for today. I want the media to keep pushing and to help us, and somebody from the media to champion this for us.
It won't go away. Well, the media gentleman at The Guardian is clearly not going to let this lie. And then, you know, politicians like David Lammy are at their absolute best when they're on quests and crusades like this. And we here on this programme will do whatever we can do as well to keep these stories alive. I promise you that, Shirley.
Thank you. And I want those young Jamaicans out there,
yes,
second, third generation, to actually take heed and to sign these petitions and understand the importance of them being engaged in these activities and understand what's going on. You don't have to be political, but just understand how your grandparents, your parents must be feeling, and get up, sign these petitions, and help to make a difference. And just one last point, the Jamaican Prime Minister, Mr. Holness, is holding a meeting in Kilburn this week on the 20th of April between 7 and 9 at what I think they call the Rauch City
Yes.
Hall. It's not an area I'm familiar with, but he's holding a meeting, and it would be lovely if people would just turn up. He just wants to talk to British Jamaicans. He's done the same thing in America, in Canada, and he's doing it for the first time in the UK. We need to just go up there as young people and express our feelings to him, so that somebody understands how we're feeling and can represent us with Theresa May or whoever else in the government wants to listen.
I hear you.
And not give up.
No.
I really do appeal to the media to keep pushing.
I think they will. I think they will. I bow to nobody in my disgust at what the Daily Mail has done to this country, but even a stop clock is right twice a day, and even they appear to be on the right side of this story. 12:15 is the time. Shirley, do you think it's going to be another 40 years before you ring me again?
I hope not, but I want to call you when under better circumstances.
Let's do it under happier circumstances. Shirley listening since 1975. That's shortly after Steve Allen got his bus pass, and this is the first time that she's ever rung into LBC, which gives you an indication of the strength of feeling. Understandably, I don't think is there a more chilling phrase in the news today than "deported in error"? That's Channel 4 News tonight. I'll have more on that. Deported in error. Wow. Still think you've got your country back. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we continue with this heartbreaking story of people being locked up because they can't prove that they've been here since they came here with their parents from Barbados and Jamaica and Grenada and Guyana and Caribbean countries whence the Windrush generation came. And their children now are being deported, quotes, in error, end quotes, as a direct result of laws enacted by the woman who is now Prime Minister and who up until 22 minutes ago had refused to meet the leaders of the Commonwealth countries who are profoundly concerned about British citizens suffering in this way. And even by the standards of Brexit Britain and Trump's America, I can't quite believe that this is happening on our watch. And there is evidence, I'll tweet it shortly, that when these ideas were formulated at Theresa May's Home Office, she was warned that this would happen. Victor's in Warwick. Victor, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello, Victor.
I'd like to say, first of all, I don't know why people are so surprised.
Go on.
You know, this is what Britain does. This is what Britain has done continually to the Caribbean generation. Well, now they're turning on our elders, on my mum, my dad, and many other people. But I'm one of the second generation born in this country. And as one man earlier on said, we've been abused, we've been victimised, we've been assaulted by the police. I can remember going to school and having to run away from the National Front.
Yeah.
Okay, so this isn't surprising, you know. And when you hear people going on like, "Oh, it's a big shock," well, obviously they've ignored everything.
No, Can I argue with you politely, even though I don't really feel qualified to do so?
Yeah.
You're describing the actions of racists. And we're talking today about the actions of our government. And while I utterly understand and believe what you describe of your experiences, I am surprised that a government is doing this, because I don't think that I've lived in a country since John Major's premiership. I don't think I've lived in a country with a government that could be described in any way as racist until today.
Yeah, well, that's that. Okay, I understand that, but obviously you haven't followed people, which is normal. No, you haven't followed the British government's policy concerning the Caribbean.
No, it's possible I haven't, and the phone line's gone a bit south, so we'll try and fix that and then come back briefly, Victor. My apologies for that. It is just because of the phone line, and you could be right. I shall I look forward to hearing more from you. But I do, and you're right. I don't have a dog in the race. It's all very well a fellow with an apostrophe in his surname waxing lyrical about the no dogs, no blacks, no Irish signs, but you know, it didn't impact upon me or my dad particularly. So it isn't, of course, by any stretch of the imagination, a story I'm part of or a story that I fully understand. But I didn't think that the British government could be construed as having discriminated against people like you and your parents. And when you tell me how, he's back, Victor. So talk me through what I don't know then.
Well, the British government over the last 40 years have had a policy considering, right, we're so proud of this Commonwealth, okay, even though the history of the Commonwealth and the way it was brought together we know about, but we're so proud of it. But over the last 40 years, the British government has actually dismantled the infrastructure of the Caribbean in terms of trade. The British government done so much trade with the Caribbean. Most of the food that we would eat, green bananas, yams, that kind of stuff, it was all coming from the Caribbean. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, when the British government, for reasons unknown to themselves, decided to say no, maybe it was cheaper to get all of these goods from South America.
Okay.
Right? They just left the Caribbean. You know, so nothing grows in the Caribbean no more. There's so much poverty. Nothing else has been put in place, like new businesses or new business infrastructure. Nothing at all. You know, and that's been going on over a long
that's fine.
time.
Yeah, I mean, we could have an economic argument about protectionism versus free trade, but we're not going to today.
Let's forget the economic argument. Let's get back to personal now. Now, my mother came here from Barbados, and my dad, okay? And this was at the bequest of the National Health Service, as you rightfully said, after the Second World War. Right. Now, my mother worked in the National Health Service, very proud, you know, and what people need to understand is when the so-called Windrush generation came here, right? Yes. They were law-abiding people back home. They had a healthy respect for the law and order, and they taught their children to be polite and be very respectful, okay? So this is the mentality that they came to the country with. They instilled it in us, their children, all right? But as I said, we now, the first and second generation, from going to school, because it starts in the schools, and it followed us all the way through up to now.
And this feels like proof. This feels like vindication of your fears and suspicions.
Remember, Sir Herman Ouseley was appointed because there was it was proven that the Metropolitan Police was institutionally racist. Okay, then there was another inquiry that went on in the British Army that was proving the same thing. You know, and then race laws was brought out, equality law. So,
but no, I will still hold loosely to my, because I'm not ready yet to be as depressed as I would be if I let go of it, Victor. I will hold loosely to the notion that the government itself has not acted in a racist way, because that you could equally argue about the closure of coal mines in the north of England, denuding a community and robbing a community. So they didn't stop importing stuff from the Caribbean because it's full of black people. That's all I've got left. All right. Can I keep that?
Well, yeah, you can. You know, but as I said, because we've gone.
I'm here to learn every day. Every day I'm here to learn, and every day I do. Experience is the better part of valor, you know. So a lot of these people that have been phoning up this morning and talking to you, right? Hats off to them. Yes.
You know, but of course they're just blown for 10, not even for 6.
Yeah.
You know, but if people are really ready to be honest and truthful, right, they should not be too surprised, James.
Maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. I guess I was surprised when Theresa May gave that conference speech that had all the UKIP clowns cheering to the rafters. I guess I was surprised when I saw go-home vans driving through the streets of my city. I guess I was surprised when I heard a British Prime Minister talk about citizens of the world being citizens of nowhere. And I guess you're right, Victor. I shouldn't be surprised to discover today that laws written when she was Home Secretary have led to innocent, law-abiding, tax-paying British people being locked up and ultimately, in cases that Channel 4 News will report tonight, deported in error. Tony's in Enfield. Tony, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hi, Tony.
Well, I've got same as this last caller. I'm first generation born here. My parents came from the Caribbean, both of them. The only thing they kept, some of my older brothers and sisters were born in the Caribbean, and the rest of us were born here.
Oh yeah.
My brother recently he was reapplying, bearing in mind reapplying, I'm stressed, for a passport, and he had a letter and a form having to indicate his status for being here, and that was I think it was about a year and a half ago.
And how many years had he been here? All his life?
No. He was born in the Caribbean. He came in when he was 12 in the 60s.
Sorry, yes, that's what I meant, really.
If people remember, in the 80s, I think it was in the 90s, people in the Caribbean who came from the Caribbean, they also had forms, and there was something to do with the government, and I can't actually, somebody researching would find out, had to re-register their status for being in this country. And that happened either in the late 80s or early 90s.
I don't know about that. I believe you.
Yeah, that's I'm telling you as a fact. They had
I believe you. I believe you completely.
Forms filled out, and they had to re-register their status in this country.
Yeah.
And the point I'm making is what really needs to happen now. There's something sinister about this, and I don't like saying it, but there's something very sinister about this.
That's what you sense, don't you, that that's what I'm trying to resist, but my resistance is crumbling.
I'll give you a why.
Go on.
There's people all over this country. I mean, and I'll just pick out, for instance, certain sportsmen have played sport for this country who weren't born here. They came here separate. They were born in India. I mean, I'll take for instance a couple of cricketers.
We've got a foreign secretary who wasn't born here. Where are we going with this? Yeah.
Well, as I'm saying, where is their status being questioned?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes.
You know?
So it's just ordinary people further down the food chain.
I mean, my brother also knows that the guy who's been in the news recently with the operation who's got cancer, who's now...
Albert Thompson.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, which is... That's why I say something sinister. Since when has the National Health Service doing immigration checks on people?
Well, since Theresa May changed the rules as Home Secretary.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is...
And Theresa May was warned that this would happen, and that is where you get your definition of sinister from, because she knew it was going to happen. That also explains, for fans of Occam's razor, why she wouldn't want to meet with the Commonwealth leaders until the media optics became so ugly that she felt she had to. Because if it is proved, as it probably will be, that she was categorically and personally warned that this was going to happen, but she pressed on regardless, then in normal times, in normal times, this is a huge scandal, but obviously in Brexit Britain, nobody gets held to account for anything.
I mean, can I just finish with one thing?
Of course you can.
I've often been asked the question. I mean, I was born here, my parents weren't, and people often say to me, "Oh, you're English," and I've had it since I was small, and I don't like saying it, but I've never felt English. If someone asked me, I class myself as British.
Yes.
But I have never been, for the guy who's speaking before me, because of personal experiences. And I remember back in the 80s, and I'm telling you now, I had to hide under a car in the pouring rain with my face pressed up against some dog mess, hiding from the National Front who were chasing me down the street. And that was in the 80s. And I said, I've never felt English. I've felt British, but I've never felt English.
No, I understand that. I mean, but that would make sense to me, the idea that you feel British, because You've got roots in the Caribbean, which British dominions, and you live in Britain. But to feel English, it's not something that shocks me that at all. I don't know that feeling English is necessarily the description that I'd apply to myself either. I think I probably feel more British than English. Yeah. And long may it continue. Luckily, I suppose, I'm not in danger of facing deportation in error, whereas if I came from your background, then I would be. 12:31 is the time. I think you can tell I'm a little bit discombobulated today, because I don't want to believe all these men and women who are describing to me their conviction that this is evidence of broader truths. But let's just focus for a minute on the kind of people that would have been marching with the National Front when men like the ones I've spoken today had to hide, and ask yourself whether any of them have kind of prospered in recent years, whether any of them, any National Front types, or Front National types as well, of course, their French equivalent, or the AfD in Germany, Viktor Orban in Hungary. Just off the top of your head, do you think of anyone that's prospered in Britain in recent years who would be very comfortable in the company of Marine Le Pen, perhaps a fan of Viktor Orban? I don't know, maybe someone who even addresses rallies for the Nazi throwbacks in Germany's AfD. Oh, they messed up my life. I had a steady job. It broke my heart losing it. When my mum passed away, I wasn't there. That's Howard, 61 years old. Arrived with his mother in the UK, aged 3, from Jamaica. Never lived anywhere else. Didn't have the paperwork to prove that he had a right to be in the UK, so was told he was an illegal immigrant. Lost his job with the Peabody Trust, despite being a highly regarded employee who'd worked there for more than a decade. Why did he want to leave the country for the first time? Because his mum's back in Jamaica. She became ill. He wanted to visit her. Couldn't get a British passport. His mother died without him seeing her. Of course, he also lost his job, so unable to work. He was also told he wasn't entitled to benefits because he had no immigration status here. Why? Because Theresa May wanted to create a hostile environment for illegal immigrants. And she's ended up denying a man who's lived there since the age of 3 and was working for a housing charity, denying him the right to be with his dying mother, the right to a job, the right to a home. She's Prime Minister. Nicola's in Crystal Palace. Nicola, what's going on?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
First time caller, a little bit nervous.
Oh, it's only me.
I'm calling. I know. I'm just calling to tell my father-in-law's story.
Oh, yes.
He came to UK from Jamaica in 1956, lived here for 58 years, and decided that, aged 80, he wanted to retire home to Jamaica to, live out his final years.
Yeah.
He is now unable to re-enter the UK.
Oh,
he wanted to come back for a visit. He has all his, full UK pension, has a house here he rents out. He needs to come back to sort out financial matters. He wants to see his first great-grandchild, who's going to be 2 tomorrow, and he's completely devastated and perplexed as to why he cannot just buy a plane ticket and come back to visit. He's had indefinite leave to remain status.
Well, what's happened then?
Well, because he's been out of the country for more than 2 years.
Yeah, but can't he come on holiday?
No, can't come on holiday. For him to come on holiday, we've got to go through this about £2,000 it's going to cost us for him to apply for a visitor visa.
I don't believe it.
Which the UK government are currently turning down over 80% of the applications for Jamaicans to come here to visit.
So he came here in 50... They're doing what?
Yes, yeah. It's unbelievable. We just spoke to a top solicitor last week. Cost us £360 for an hour's
plus
consultation.
VAT. Yeah.
Yep. To be told that we have to get letters from all his family here, his children, his grandchildren. We need to prove that he is self-sufficient, despite the fact that he has a full UK pension, plus he earns the income from a rental property.
He's been here since 1956.
Yes.
And because he didn't have... So was he still travelling on a Jamaican passport?
Yeah, because he didn't apply for British citizenship, which we knew nothing about.
Why would you? You presumed he was.
He's a very together man.
Yeah, clearly. No, but this is what nobody knew, and nobody knew. And in fact, he didn't need to, did he, until she changed the laws?
No, as he left, I mean, if we'd known this, obviously we'd have encouraged him. But obviously he has, he was born in Jamaica. He's fully entitled to retain that.
This is it.
Jamaican
This is what
heritage.
happens. This is what happens.
And when he came here, he was actually a British national. He came here in 1956. Jamaica was a part of the Jamaica was a part of the Commonwealth. My partner didn't believe me. I've sort of been telling him. I've been hearing stories for a few months now, and he's like, "No way, Nick, no way, it can't be true." But it is true.
But why would he not believe you if his dad was getting the same experience? He just thought his dad was unlucky and it wasn't part of a bigger picture. It was just he'd ticked the wrong box 30 years ago or something like that.
Well, because to be honest, as far as he's concerned, his dad is, and as far as I'm concerned, and I think any sane rational human being is concerned, his father has full entitlement to be able to enter and leave this country as he wishes, as if he was a British national. And if they were going to, the hostile environment that was created in 2014, why did they not write to all that Windrush generation that were on indefinite leave to remain to reiterate to them that, if they don't come back into the country within 2 years, they will lose their status?
Well, you answer that question for me, Nick, if you would.
Well,
because either it's sinister, it's either incompetence or it's sinister, right?
Yeah, I mean, my question is, why is the UK government so desperate to reduce immigration figures that they're wasting time and money and energy in a vexatious policy of deporting or not allowing people that have been here living and working their whole adult lives for 40, 50 years? Why are they picking on these people to reduce the immigration figures by a few hundred or a few thousand?
Yeah. And suddenly that...
Absolutely, I'm ashamed to say I'm British. I have to say, I am absolutely ashamed to say that I am British at the moment.
Yes, I understand.
And it seems to me that people are becoming... It seems to me that it's okay now. This sort of thing is becoming normalised, that it's okay to be like this because people are so consumed with this immigration rhetoric in this country that obviously the government feels that it's okay to bring in these laws, that they can get away with it.
Because once reason...
We've all got to stand up. We've all got to stand up and we've got to fight this now.
Well, I'm standing behind you, all right?
Yeah, 100%. I'm devastated. And it's like, I've written a letter, I'm sending it out to the Jamaican High Commissioner, to Theresa May, to Sadiq Khan, to my MP. I'm going to write to everyone and everyone. There's a petition on change.org.
There is.
I think the lady was Cleo Lake that set up that, every decent human being in this country...
So this isn't even the... I mean, if he'd still been here, he could have been facing the experiences we've been hearing from other callers.
He's slightly different, which is why I phoned up.
Yeah, that's what I'm interested in.
Because there are lots of Jamaicans that have lived here the whole, worked and lived here, like my father-in-law, that have gone home to retire. Yeah. And now, it happened to a friend of mine. Her aunt came back to go to her sister's funeral. She landed at Gatwick, 83 years old. She's been told she can't come in the country.
Christ.
She, and being treated as if she is an illegal alien, someone who's acting criminally. That's what I find so disgusting, and this is somebody in their 80s that's been treated like that, that's worked and contributed in this country their whole life.
Yes, and it is impossible to escape the conclusion that they just don't care.
Yeah, 100%, we will continue with our solicitor's application for my father-in-law. We will continue to campaign. But, he's 84 in a couple of months' time. We don't want to put this stress and anxiety onto him. We're trying to do this without impacting on him so much.
Yeah, of course you are. Well, let me know how you get on. Let me know if I can rattle any cages for what... I don't know that I can.
Thank you so much for highlighting this, James, and please keep bringing
we're going to have to. We're going to have to, aren't we?
Our media... Yeah. The Guardian have been brilliant. They've been really campaigning the last few months. They've been bringing lots of stories, but we need to get the rest of the media involved in this.
Well, it looks that way, and they are moving in the right direction. I say it again, I bow to nobody in my disgust at what the Daily Mail has done to this country, but on this one at least they seem to be on the side of the angels. Nicola, keep me in the loop, let me know, and as you say, he's lucky to have a daughter-in-law like you, to be honest, not only going into bat for him, but also keen to keep him or protect him from some of the implications of the situation in which he finds himself. It's 12:45. You know, probably a few years ago, I'd have said that someone must have misreported this or misheard it. But what's her job at the moment, Esther McVey?
Work and Pension Secretary.
Theo's here. I should have perhaps given you a heads up about that. Do you know how in the under the child benefit rules that this government has brought in, limiting it to 2, there's an exemption for women who've been raped. If a child is born after a woman was raped, if it's a 3rd or 4th child, they will still get benefit. Esther McVey apparently has just said that because you have to go to the DWP to tell somebody that you were raped.
And then there are various sort of questions and tests.
Suggestion is that this is a bit of an inhuman way to behave. I'm very reliably told that Esther McVey has just said that rape survivors might welcome the opportunity to talk about their ordeal to a stranger to access benefits. She used the phrase, it's potentially double support.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know. That's insightful analysis from me.
I was going to just do one of my little... I was going to talk to the people listening. I wasn't going to talk to you, but here you are.
Okay, well...
To talk about Syria, but... what is the latest today? What's going to happen today?
We're waiting to find out whether the Speaker, John Bercow, has granted Standing Order 24.
He will, won't he?
Yes, he will.
And is the reason why the government have called for it because Jeremy Corbyn showed them his hand over the weekend and they knew he was going to, so... God, what a mess.
You do Standing Order 24 for 2 or 3 reasons. Firstly, you can limit the debate to 3 hours. That means that you can limit the number of speakers who contribute in a debate in the House of Commons, and you can then, if you're limiting the number of speakers, you can also limit the amount of time that they speak for, and therefore the accusation is that the government can squash any major dissent in the House of Commons and simply put it through. And the second reason is when it comes to the motion itself, it's a very bland motion usually. It's along the lines of this House has considered whether military action is, in this case, military action in Syria was justified. It's not. You can have a division on it, but there's no way of really putting up a protest and creating any form of binding decision that the House of Commons has made that can hold the government to account. And that's why the government has done this. Now Labour are considering their hand, and of course it will depend on what happens with this Standing Order 24 to come back with something that could be divisible. They might try to do that in an opposition day motion. They might try to do that in another emergency debate of some description to, in effect, bind the government to future military action in Syria.
And how do the numbers shake down?
They're shaking down better for the government,
yes.
Because, of course, what Theresa May has done by talking about the national interest is make it a them and us issue. Look at me, strong on national security. Look at Jeremy Corbyn. That has the effect of rallying Conservative MPs behind her, and also, therefore, to a certain extent, saying to those MPs, if you vote against me, if you decide to go against the 3-line whip, then look who you're adding succour to. You're adding succour to the leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn. And so at the moment it is looking better. On top of that, she can also rely on probably around 20 or 30 Labour MPs to come onto her side.
OK. And closer to home, this Windrush story it's among the ugliest I can remember covering, actually, in all the years that I've been on this radio station, because these are the people that listen to us. These are our callers, these are our friends, our neighbours, our nurses, our teachers, you know, and I can't quite believe what we've spent the last 2 hours listening to.
2:30, Amber Rudd in the House of Commons. Huge amount of pushback on the Conservative benches as well as obviously on the Labour benches. We're expecting more detail to a climb down. Theresa May's spokesman saying this morning to journalists that nobody would have to leave the United Kingdom as a result of this policy. And then, of course, Caroline Noakes, the immigration minister, has just gone on the airwaves and said that, in effect, they've already left and some people have been deported.
In error.
In error. So we've got a question now about whether those people are going to be allowed to come back. And also, it's not just a question...
What if it turns out that it happened while she was Home Secretary and she was unaware of it? I mean, I hesitate to use the phrase resignation issue, but I'm pretty sure it would have been once before politics got broken.
The issue is, and this came up time and time again when Prime Minister's spokesman was being questioned, is that Theresa May made it increasingly difficult in these situations increasingly difficult for people to apply, to say, well, actually, I've got a right to be here, and very sensitive issues because, of course, we're going back 40, 50 years to try and find paperwork or proof that this individual has a right to be here. And, of course, it also adds, it feeds into the Brexit negotiations, and this was pointed out, that people like Guy Verhofstadt, who is the European Parliament's chief negotiator in the European Parliament, is going to be looking at this saying, well, hang on a moment, if this is what you do to those people who have been here 40 or 50 years, we need to represent our EU nationals. Therefore, we're going to ask for much tougher measures to make sure that their interests are protected and they can't be deported. And so it feeds into that narrative. Watch that space.
Who wrote the Citizens of Nowhere speech?
Theresa May.
She wrote it herself?
No, Nick Timothy.
So that phrase, citizen of the world is a citizen of nowhere, comes from Nick Timothy, this bloke who was an advisor. I apologise for that. I was typing while you were talking. People would have heard it. Do you know why I was typing?
Were you tweeting him?
No, because this Nick Timothy character, who was... who's just come out in support of Tom Tugendhat on the so-called Windrush kids. He writes, the solution lies in formalising their status, not abandoning sensible policies to limit illegal immigration. But this is urgent. They're Brits who have done nothing wrong, yet they're being treated terribly. Now, I thought that he was at the Home Secretary for the duration of Theresa May's tenure there. I presume, because just in my mind, I'm a bit like you, I've got a magpie mind for the political fine detail, but I thought there's no way that he could have been. You must have got that wrong, James, because if he was there for the whole 5 years, how could he now take to social media to describe policies that he brought in as... leading to people being treated terribly, policies that they were warned about. So, unfortunately, I used Wikipedia to type in his name and double-check. He was an advisor to the Home Secretary for the duration of her tenure as Home Secretary, and he obviously had to leave Downing Street after presiding over the disaster of the last election. The relationship between British media and British politics is such that being the architect of that disaster sees him rewarded with columns in The Sun and the Daily Telegraph, and now he takes to social media to essentially castigate a policy that he would have been an architect of.
There was a bit of incredulity this morning because, of course, when we asked why Theresa May had refused a meeting with leaders from the 12 countries affected by this policy, we were told that she hadn't refused the meeting. She didn't know that there was a meeting that she could refuse. It had been refused by somebody further down the food chain, and she was only aware of the issue. And as soon as she was aware of the issue, then the meeting was going to take place as soon as possible.
Do we think that's true?
It could well be possibly true. I mean, the Prime Minister isn't going to be looking at every invitation or request or
but she might have registered that this Windrush story was a pretty big deal. You might have thought... I appreciate that her chief spokesman is a former political editor of the Daily Mail, and her other sort of key media man used to edit the Andrew Marr show, so she's not exactly surrounded with what you might call dissenting voices. But somebody somewhere might have said, is anything going on with this Windrush stuff? Is there something I should know about?
They're looking into where the breakdown of communication happened, and it was a matter of regret that it wasn't sorted out sooner. So, but you...
So just to clarify, Theo Usherwood, she claimed that no one would have to leave the country as a result of this debacle, and then her own immigration minister has come out and said people already have.
Yeah.
She was Home Secretary when the rules were written.
Yeah.
And she wasn't aware of the fact that the leaders of the countries to which these people have been deported, quotes, in error, end quotes, wanted to talk to her about it.
Yeah, she wasn't aware. No. That's what we were told this morning. She wasn't aware. When she was aware and people around her were aware, now we're going to have a meeting as quickly as possible.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's the satirists I feel sorry for.
Well, because they're now unemployed.
How the hell do you take the mickey out of this kind of political situation? And just to add to that, I've had a little look. I've just double-checked this. And, yeah, this character, Nick Timothy, was at the Home Office for the whole of the 5 years and is now taking to social media to talk about how it's urgent. They're Brits who've done nothing wrong, yet they're being treated terribly. When did we give up on people taking responsibility for their actions? Poor old Theo. He's here as the political editor. He thought he was coming in to talk about the vote on Syria, and now I'm doing existential philosophical angst. What happened to the relationship between actions and consequences, Theo Usherwood? Answer the question!
I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know what to say. I sometimes think this is like the hardest job. This is the hardest bit.
See, when I talk to you, I don't do this, do I, Cleo?
That's because I think more highly of him than you do.
That's not true.
I think he's got the answers to all the most complicated political questions.
No, he definitely doesn't.
I like to give him a bit more room than you do. That's all. That's all it is. Yeah. I don't want him to stay on the rails.
I just give him more chocolate.
You want to see me like fly off into a tree?
Analysis. I'm just double checking my facts. We're cool. Yeah,
we're good.
What times? And will there definitely be a vote, or that depends on what?
No, there will be a vote, but it will just be on something very bland, and that's why the government went down the route of SA24.
And that is it from me and LBC's political editor Theo Ushwood for another day. I suppose it's healthy that we can still feel a bit incredulous. It's when you no longer get surprised by anything that the lunatics really have taken over the asylum, isn't it? Not that is an apposite way in which to introduce you to folks.
It isn't.